What if I told you that getting a massive, life-changing pay raise at a new job will actually do absolutely nothing to lower your stress levels within 6 months?
It sounds completely backwards, right? I mean, we're totally conditioned to think money fixes everything.
Yeah, exactly. But today we are doing a deep dive into the brutal economics, the psychological traps, and really just the sheer evolutionary panic of starting a new job.
Which is something literally everyone watching or listening to this has experienced. It's universal.
Right. So we are pulling apart this incredibly practical survival guide for the modern workplace. It's an article from Psychology Today, and it's called 12 Tips for Managing New Job Anxiety, written by John Patrick Hatcher.
And he's a real authority in this space, you know. He wrote 101 Ways to Conquer Teen Anxiety and Anxiety Hacks for an Uncertain World.
Yeah, and the way he opens his entire argument, it immediately shatters the tension of walking into an unfamiliar office on day one. He writes, quote, "If Nicolas Cage can still get work, you can do anything."
I love that so much. It forces you to drop the catastrophic narrative you've built up in your head, right?
It really does. Because, when you sign an offer letter, you're sold this cultural fiction of the victory lap.
Oh, totally. You buy a new coffee mug, you update your LinkedIn.
Right. You expect to strut into the lobby on Monday morning feeling like an absolute conqueror. But the biological reality is that you are stepping into a state of, profound vulnerability.
Yes, that anxiety you feel, that bottomless gnawing pit in your stomach, it is not a sign of incompetence.
It's not, because it really feels like it is.
It feels like it, yeah. But it is not an indicator that you are like a fraud who somehow tricked the hiring manager. It is a deeply ingrained, evolutionarily hardwired protective mechanism.
So it's literally just caveman biology.
Exactly. Hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. They simply do not care about your brand new title as senior marketing director.
Right. Your ancient nervous system operates on completely different parameters. When you walk into a new corporate environment, your brain doesn't see a landscape of, career opportunity.
No, it sees an entirely unknown tribe.
It sees an unfamiliar social hierarchy, unmapped territory, unpredictable threats.
Your brain is basically blasting an alarm, demanding heightened alertness. Because in the ancestral environment, entering a new camp without knowing who the alpha is,
or where the predators are hiding.
Right, that was a fast track to getting killed.
Which is why the physiological response is just so overwhelming. Your heart races, your palms sweat, your digestion completely shuts down. It is the exact same biological sequence that kept early humans alive in the wild, being entirely misapplied to a Tuesday morning onboarding session.
A Tuesday morning onboarding session, yeah.
And acknowledging this evolutionary baseline is the first mandatory step of the process. If you can accept that the panic is simply your internal operating system executing a primitive security protocol, you can stop layering secondary anxiety on top of the primary anxiety. Wait, secondary anxiety?
Yeah, you stop panicking about the fact that you're panicking.
Oh, wow. Yeah. The relief of realizing it's just biology is huge. But, understanding the caveman brain doesn't pay the rent.
True.
And before we can start applying the specific mental and physical hacks to survive that first week, we have to dismantle this fundamental lie we tell ourselves about why we even take these stressful new jobs in the first place.
Yes, this is so critical.
Which brings us right to the text's very first rule, and it hits like a ton of bricks. It says, don't leave a job you hate for one you hate less but pays more.
Which completely upends conventional wisdom, right? The standard assumption is that financial compensation functions as this mathematical offset to workplace misery.
Like, if a toxic job pays $80,000, but you find another toxic job that pays $110,000.
The prevailing logic dictates you take the money. You assume the extra $30,000 will act as a psychological buffer against the stress. But behavioral economics proves this assumption is demonstrably false. The text relies heavily here on a landmark 2018 study by Dirawachter and Schwartzman.
Okay, unpacking this.
Yeah, so it was published in the Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization, and it tracked the anticipation and adaptation effects of wage changes on overall job satisfaction.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because it's really easy to say money doesn't buy happiness. It's a nice platitude. But if inflation is running high, groceries are astronomically expensive, rent is due, a bigger paycheck is absolutely a tangible shield against existential anxiety.
It provides literal security.
Exactly. How does the text or this study reconcile the very real relief of financial security with the claim that taking the higher-paying toxic job is a mistake?
What's fascinating here is the crucial distinction we have to make between financial stress and occupational stress.
Okay, I'm listening.
Money unequivocally relieves financial anxiety. If you cannot pay your rent, a higher salary eliminates that specific terrifying pressure.
Right.
But the 2018 study looks at the illusion that resolving financial stress will somehow neutralize the occupational stress of a miserable work environment. Wachter and Schwartzman tracked the exact timeline of human adaptation to income.
And what did they find?
They found that human beings do not evaluate their income in absolute utility. We do not wake up every day and say, I make $110,000, therefore my baseline happiness should remain at a constant level of 8 out of 10.
So what do we do?
We evaluate income strictly in relative terms, anchoring it immediately against what we made yesterday.
So the brain's hedonic treadmill kicks in almost immediately. We get the raise, and it provides a massive spike in dopamine. But how long does that actually last before the brain normalizes it?
It is shockingly brief. The study identified a strong anticipation effect right before the wage increase.
Like the psychological high of signing the offer letter?
Exactly. And then there's a significant spike in job satisfaction at the exact moment the new salary hits the bank account. But the adaptation effect begins almost instantly. Within a matter of months, your brain entirely recalibrates. The new higher salary is no longer processed as a raise. It simply becomes the new invisible benchmark of normal existence.
So your lifestyle costs creep up to meet the new income.
The novelty completely evaporates, and the increased job satisfaction drops right back to the previous baseline.
The text describes this phenomenon perfectly. It says taking a job just for the money gives you that brief high, but eventually, quote, the American dream leaves your body.
Yes.
It is the exact mechanics of a sugar rush. You ingest the sugar, the higher salary, and you feel invincible. You buy the more expensive coffee, you upgrade your car lease, you feel a surge of artificial energy.
But a sugar rush doesn't change the underlying nutritional deficit.
Exactly. When you crash, you are still sitting in a toxic environment, dealing with a micromanaging boss, doing work you fundamentally despise. Except now, you are trapped in that misery because your monthly expenses have expanded to rely on that specific paycheck. You cannot budget your way out of a toxic Tuesday morning meeting.
The employer is essentially renting your misery at a slightly higher premium. And this leads to a broader critique woven into the source material regarding modern workplace culture.
Right.
Many corporate leaders fundamentally fail to understand this psychological adaptation. They attempt to buy loyalty and morale through temporary financial bumps or superficial perks. The text refers to this specifically as relying on salary increases and free bagels.
The ping pong tables in the break room and the mandatory Friday pizza parties are just corporate sugar rushes.
Exactly. They are external dopamine hits that fade by Monday morning. It is an attempt to bypass the hard systemic work of creating a culture built on psychological safety, meaningful engagement, and mutual respect.
So the stark conclusion the text arrives at is pretty much a necessary pill to swallow. Job satisfaction and your overall happiness regarding your career are ultimately up to you.
An employer cannot surgically implant happiness into your psyche, no matter how many perks they offer.
If the core mechanics of the job are misaligned with your values, or if the environment is hostile, the money will only serve as a temporary anesthetic. And once the anesthesia wears off, you are left alone with your own internal processing.
Which means we can't rely on the external validation of the paycheck or the title to soothe that evolutionary panic we talked about. We have to look inward.
Right. If the environment is fundamentally sound, but we are still utterly terrified to walk through the doors, we have to examine the lies our own brains are actively constructing.
Yes, and this is where the text pivots into the actual mental battlefield of cognitive behavioral therapy. It establishes a brutal but liberating ground rule.
Thoughts and feelings don't equal facts.
Internalizing that single sentence is perhaps the most difficult challenge of the human experience.
It really is.
When your nervous system is flooded with adrenaline and your chest is tight, your brain naturally assumes there must be a tangible, factual reason for the terror.
Right, because why else would I be freaking out?
Exactly. The biological sensation of fear is so potent that it tricks the prefrontal cortex into reverse engineering a threat to justify the physical feeling. You feel like an imposter, therefore you assume you are an imposter.
You feel like you're going to be fired for a minor mistake, therefore you assume the firing is a factual inevitability.
The author uses a highly visceral image to describe how this mechanism operates. He says that underlying anxiety can lie dormant and flare like gout.
Gout. It is a brilliant medical metaphor.
It really is, because gout is a systemic condition caused by a buildup of uric acid, but it manifests in sudden, localized, agonizing flare-ups, often in a single joint.
So the author's pointing out that if you have a pre-existing psychological predisposition to anxiety, whether it manifested previously in your academic life, your personal relationships, or a former career,
that systemic condition does not magically vanish when you sign a new contract. A new job is simply a convenient, highly stressful new joint for the anxiety to inflame.
The new job isn't the root cause of the existential dread. It is merely the trigger causing the current flare-up.
So the anxiety is essentially a heat-seeking missile looking for a new target, and your new manager's totally neutral facial expression is the brightest heat signature in the room.
You start projecting years of unresolved insecurity onto this brand new environment. And the text warns that when this psychological gout flares up, our immediate reflex is to engage in a behavior that actually makes the condition significantly worse. Seeking assurances.
Seeking assurances is a classic compulsion in the anxiety cycle. It masquerades as a reasonable attempt to gain clarity.
Like sending an email and then immediately asking a colleague, did that sound okay? Was I too aggressive?
Yes, or repeatedly checking your work far past the point of diminishing returns, desperately trying to confirm that you haven't made a catastrophic error.
But the text identifies this behavior as an insidious trap.
Every single time you seek external assurance, you are implicitly validating the underlying premise of the anxiety. You're telling your brain, yes, this situation is incredibly dangerous and I need constant external validation to survive it.
You are feeding the algorithm. You are rewarding the brain for generating the panic. Instead of seeking that futile certainty, the text offers tip 1. Risk is scary. Regret is scarier.
We are instructed to deliberately sit with the discomfort of uncertainty.
Which sounds awful.
It is awful. But we have to abandon the search for the perfect, ideal job where we never feel insecure. The quote that anchors this is, "All work is noble."
Removing the pressure of destiny from a job is a massive cognitive relief.
When we elevate a career to the status of an identity, or demand that a specific role be the ultimate fulfillment of our potential, the stakes become impossibly high. Every minor mistake feels like a failure of identity.
By returning to the foundational idea that all work is noble, you strip away the inflated existential weight. It is an exchange of labor for capital. It is a set of tasks performed within a specific time frame.
By accepting the permanent reality of uncertainty, you stop fighting the unknown and begin to tolerate the discomfort.
Tolerating the discomfort requires active mental management. The text introduces the concept of mental filters, and it lists several very specific cognitive distortions we have to actively police.
Right, things like negative predicting, underestimating our own abilities, chronic overthinking, maintaining unrelenting standards of perfection, and catastrophizing every minor setback.
So what does this all mean for us functionally? The best way to operationalize this is to treat your brain exactly like an overly aggressive corporate IT spam filter.
The IT department analogy perfectly illustrates the mechanism of cognitive reframing.
Think about how a hypervigilant spam filter operates. It scans incoming data and flags anything that even slightly resembles a threat. Your brain is doing the exact same thing in the new office. A coworker walks past your desk without saying good morning.
Your brain's IT department immediately triggers alarms.
Warning, social rejection. The tribe is turning against us. Career-ending virus detected. It takes a completely neutral piece of data and catastrophizes it into a survival threat.
In reality, it's just harmless junk mail. That coworker was just mentally distracted by their own workload.
To survive the mental battlefield, you have to actively open your mental inbox, look at these catastrophic predictions, recognize them as phishing attempts generated by your own amygdala, and mentally click send to spam. You cannot allow them to sit in your primary inbox and dictate your workflow.
What you are describing is the core mechanical action of cognitive behavioral therapy. You are fundamentally separating the occurrence of a thought from the validity of a thought.
Right.
You acknowledge that the email arrived, you feel the anxiety, you hear the catastrophic prediction, but you are actively categorizing it as useless, non-actionable data rather than empirical truth.
If you engage with every piece of mental spam, if you click the link and follow the catastrophic logic all the way down the rabbit hole, your cognitive system crashes.
You get locked in a rumination loop.
And to help us click that spam button faster, the author provides a phenomenal reality check. It's grim, but it cuts right through the panic. He writes, quote, Nothing is permanent except income tax.
Yeah. It immediately rescales the threat level. Your inability to master the new software system on day 3 is not permanent.
The awkward joke you made in the break room that landed flat is not permanent.
The sheer terror of not knowing where the printer paper is kept is not permanent. Even the job itself is entirely temporary.
The evolutionary panic demands that you treat every interaction as life or death, but the stakes are exponentially lower than your nervous system is reporting.
So we have the cognitive framework in place.
Yeah.
We are clicking spam on the negative predictions. We are reminding ourselves that thoughts are not facts.
But here is the critical flaw in relying solely on the mind. Cognitive reframing is nearly impossible when your physical body is hijacked by a massive dump of stress hormones.
Yes.
You can logically tell yourself, nothing is permanent, all you want, but if your hands are visibly shaking, your breathing is shallow, and your heart is pounding at 120 beats a minute, your brain simply is not going to believe the logical reassurances.
The biology overrides the logic.
Every single time. This requires us to drastically pivot our strategy. We have to bypass the mind and intervene directly through the physical body.
This is where the source material moves from psychological theory into biomechanical application. It posits a unified theory of human confidence. Confidence and insecurity are not merely abstract psychological states. They are deeply embodied physical conditions.
The brain and the body are not a one-way street where the brain issues commands and the body obeys.
Exactly. It is a continuous bi-directional feedback loop.
The imagery the text uses to illustrate this feedback loop is incredibly accurate. It describes the physical posture we subconsciously adopt when we lack confidence, when the new environment overwhelms us. We turtle.
Yes.
We physically shrink, we pull our shoulders forward, we drop our chin to our chest, we cross our arms, we try to minimize the amount of physical space we occupy.
Turtling is the quintessential mammalian defensive posture. You are instinctively rolling inward to protect your vital organs from a perceived predator.
But the biomechanical danger of turtling lies in the counter signal it sends back up the vagus nerve to the brain.
When you adopt a physically contracted defensive posture, your body communicates to your nervous system. We are currently positioned like prey. Therefore, it is an empirical fact that a predator is nearby.
The physical posture validates and amplifies the psychological terror.
It is a self-sustaining loop. The anxious brain makes the body turtle, and the turtle body provides the physical evidence the brain needs to justify becoming even more anxious.
To sever that loop, the text prescribes the direct antidote. Adopting the expansive, confidence-exuding poses of the Power Rangers, proceed accordingly.
As absurd as it sounds to channel a children's television show in a corporate environment, the directive is grounded in robust, embodied cognition research.
So how does it actually work?
When you deliberately force your body to take up more physical space, pulling your shoulders back, lifting your chin, widening your stance, you are mechanically interrupting the prey response.
You are sending a powerful countersignal to the nervous system. I am physically expansive, my vital organs are exposed and unprotected, therefore the current environment must be safe.
By manipulating the physical architecture of your body, you force the brain to downregulate the production of stress hormones to match the confident physical posture.
It's hacking the hardware to rewrite the software. And the text goes even deeper into the actual physiology of emotions with tip 10. This point completely changes the paradigm of how we view our own bodily sensations.
Yes, it states that, from a strictly physiological standpoint, excitement and anxiety are the exact same thing.
This is arguably the most powerful mechanism for emotional reappraisal available to us. The text anchors this concept in a highly influential 2014 study conducted by Allison Wood Brooks at Harvard Business School.
Right. Published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology. The study examined individuals facing intensely stressful pre-performance situations, public speaking, complex math tests, high-stakes negotiations.
Brooks mapped the physiological markers of the participants: the elevated heart rate, the massive spike in cortisol and adrenaline, the rapid and shallow breathing, the subjective feeling of butterflies in the stomach.
What the data revealed is that this severe biological arousal state is entirely indistinguishable from the biological state of profound excitement.
The physiological signature is identical. The body doesn't know the difference between the terror of a public presentation and the thrill of riding a roller coaster.
The only difference is the cognitive label our brain slaps onto the physical sensation.
Precisely. The context dictates the label. If you are strapped into a roller coaster, your brain labels the pounding heart as excitement.
If you are waiting outside the boardroom to meet your new executive team, Your brain labels the exact same pounding heart as anxiety.
The profound error we make in the workplace is attempting to violently suppress that physiological state. When you feel that massive surge of energy, your instinct is to try and force yourself into a state of total calm. You tell yourself, relax, take a deep breath, stop being anxious.
Which never works. Telling yourself to calm down when your nervous system is redlining just highlights the fact you have zero control over your body, which triggers a secondary panic attack.
You are trying to slam on the emergency brake while the engine is revving at maximum RPM. You're just going to destroy the transmission.
The Brooks study and the text itself argue that attempting to shift from high arousal anxiety to low arousal calm is biologically inefficient and largely impossible in the moment.
Instead, you utilize emotional reappraisal. You don't try to turn the energy off, you simply change the label.
You lean into the arousal. You tell yourself out loud if necessary, I am not anxious. I am incredibly excited.
I'm not terrified of this Excel spreadsheet. I'm just deeply, passionately thrilled to audit these pivot tables.
It feels ridiculous the first time you do it, but the neurobiology supports the pivot. Because anxiety and excitement share the exact same high arousal infrastructure, it requires significantly less cognitive effort to slide laterally from a negative high arousal state into a positive high arousal state than it does to completely power down the central nervous system.
You are taking the raw biological fuel of your evolutionary panic and aggressively redirecting it into performance energy.
This concept of redirecting energy feeds perfectly into tip 11, which introduces the underlying law governing all of this arousal.
The text refers to it as the stress curve.
But it is formally known as the Yerkes-Dodson law. This principle absolutely obliterates the myth that the goal of entering a new job is to achieve zero stress. The author argues that having zero stress is actually a recipe for catastrophic failure.
Wait, really? Zero stress is bad?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Yerkes-Dodson law is a foundational pillar of psychology that maps the relationship between physiological arousal and behavioral performance. It dictates that performance does not improve linearly with relaxation. It operates on a bell curve, an inverted U-shape. Let's trace the curve. If you map arousal on the horizontal axis and performance on the vertical axis, the far left side represents zero stress.
If you manage to walk into your new office completely devoid of any physiological arousal, you are not performing optimally, you are apathetic.
You are understimulated. You will lack the necessary vigilance to learn the new systems, you will miss social cues, and you will make careless errors because your brain simply hasn't allocated the resources to care.
If you are totally horizontal on day one, the employer is going to assume you are completely disengaged.
Correct. As the stress and arousal increase, you begin to climb the upward slope of the curve. The initial release of adrenaline sharpens your cognitive focus. Your reaction times decrease, your situational awareness expands, and your working memory becomes highly efficient.
This brings you to the peak of the bell curve. The text identifies this optimal zone as a 60% to 80% physiological stress arousal rate. This is the sweet spot.
You are highly energized, acutely focused, and deeply engaged, but you retain full access to your prefrontal cortex for complex problem solving.
The author has a great rhyme for this exact state, stress just enough to impress.
Yeah.
You are riding the wave of the adrenaline without letting it pull you under. But what exactly happens chemically when we push past that 80% threshold and slide down the far right side of the curve?
That is when the physiological state turns toxic. When the arousal pushes toward 90% or 100%, the balance of stress hormones fundamentally shifts.
The helpful adrenaline is overwhelmed by a massive, sustained flood of cortisol.
When cortisol saturates the brain at that level, it actively impairs the function of the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. Your working memory essentially crashes.
This is the physiological mechanism behind blanking. You literally cannot retrieve the name of the person you just met or recall the steps of the software login because the cortisol has temporarily blocked access to those neural pathways.
You cross the threshold from optimal performance into total paralysis.
So the entire game of surviving the new job is manually managing your neurochemistry to stay balanced on the peak of that curve. We want the adrenaline focus, but we have to bleed off the excess cortisol before it paralyzes us.
Yes.
Which provides a fascinating context for tip 9. The text insists that we need a simple, regular strength training regimen. It explicitly notes that we don't need abs of iron or to become Quadzilla, but that lifting weights physically works the worries away.
The literature surrounding the neurochemical benefits of resistance training is vast, specifically regarding the upregulation of endorphins and brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which repairs stress-induced damage to the brain.
But within the framework we are building, strength training serves a very specific mechanical purpose.
Right. Think about the physics we just mapped out. If the evolutionary panic is flooding our system with adrenaline and glucose to literally prepare our muscles to sprint away from a predator or engage in physical combat.
But our actual physical reality involves sitting in an ergonomic swivel chair staring at a monitor.
That energy has absolutely nowhere to go. It is trapped in the body. It manifests as the knee bouncing, the jaw clenching, the racing thoughts, the turtling posture.
We are revving a massive engine while the transmission is locked in neutral. Is strength training simply the mechanical release valve? Are we just burning off the excess physical excitement so we can manually drag our arousal level back down from the 100% panic zone into the 60% to 80% Yerkes-Dodson sweet spot?
That is precisely how the mechanism operates. You are physically completing the biological stress cycle. The brain triggered the chemical cascade for physical exertion.
By engaging in intense resistance training after work, you are finally giving the nervous system the physical exertion it spent the entire day anticipating.
You are metabolizing the trapped cortisol and glucose through muscle contraction. It is not merely a distraction. It is a fundamental biological reset that bleeds off the top 20% of that excess arousal, returning your baseline to a manageable state before you have to walk back into the office the next morning.
You are literally burning the anxiety out of the muscle tissue. So we have built a robust defensive system. We are filtering the mental spam. We are manipulating our posture to hack our vagus nerve. We are relabeling our terror as excitement, and we are lifting weights to metabolize the cortisol.
But there's a glaring external factor we have to address.
We still have to physically exist within the specific environment of the modern corporate office. And those environments are often incredibly draining, overstimulating, sensory nightmares.
How do we protect our biological battery in a space designed to drain it? This shifts us directly into the necessity of grounding the system, focusing on environment and self-care.
The text turns outward here to examine how we interact with our physical surroundings. Tip 4 is deceptively simple: nurture with nature.
It positions natural environments as the explicit antidote to the hypermodern paranoia of the open plan office. The constant feeling of being observed, the anxiety of, can everyone see my screen?
Telling someone to go look at a tree sounds like generic wellness advice, but the text grounds it in hardcore neurological evidence. It references a pivotal 2015 study out of Stanford University, conducted by Bratman and his colleagues.
They didn't just ask people how they felt after a walk. They provided quantifiable neural evidence that walking in nature significantly alters brain function and reduces the risk of depression.
What is the actual mechanism at play when we step out of the fluorescent lighting and into a park?
The Bratman study isolated the precise neurological impact of natural environments on a region of the brain known as the subgenual prefrontal cortex. To understand why this matters, we have to define what that region does. The subgenual prefrontal cortex is heavily active when we are engaging in morbid rumination.
That agonizing, repetitive loop of negative thoughts. I shouldn't have sent that email. The boss hates me. I'm going to get fired. Everyone thinks I'm incompetent. The mental spam inbox overflowing.
Exactly. When you are trapped in an open plan office, your brain is engaged in what psychologists call directed attention or hard focus.
You are forcing your brain to process complex spreadsheets, decode subtle social interactions, and suppress the massive sensory distraction of 50 other people talking and typing around you.
This directed attention is a finite cognitive resource. When it depletes, your cognitive control weakens, and the subgenual prefrontal cortex goes into overdrive, trapping you in those rumination loops.
Your battery dies, so the spam filter fails.
Precisely. The Bratman study demonstrated that taking a 90-minute walk in a natural environment, specifically comparing it to a walk in a high-traffic, urban environment, measurably decreased both the subjective experience of rumination and the actual neural activity in the subgenual prefrontal cortex.
The mechanism driving this is known as attention restoration theory. Natural environments are rich in stimuli that invoke soft fascination, the fractal patterns of leaves, the movement of water, the sound of wind.
Soft fascination engages the mind effortlessly. It requires zero directed attention. By immersing yourself in nature, you are mechanically powering down the depleted directed attention networks, allowing the cognitive battery to recharge, which in turn physically shuts down the rumination center of the brain.
It is a hard reboot for your sensory processing. You break the stare at the screen paranoia by forcing the brain to process fractal geometry. And this concept of deliberately anchoring your attention leads seamlessly into tip 5, which focuses on the practice of mindfulness.
The author describes it as giving yourself the present of presence.
But what I truly appreciate is the analogy used. The text states that mindfulness is a skill that is practiced and perfected little by little, like using chopsticks.
It is a highly reassuring framing because it normalizes the initial frustration. The most common barrier to mindfulness is the assumption that the goal is to achieve an entirely blank, empty mind.
When an anxious professional attempts to meditate for the first time, and their brain immediately begins screaming about quarterly projections and unanswered emails, they conclude they have failed at mindfulness.
It's exactly like using chopsticks for the first time. You lack the fine motor skills, your hand cramps, you drop the sushi on the table, and you feel entirely uncoordinated and ridiculous. You assume you just aren't built for it.
But the author clarifies the true mechanics of the practice. Mindfulness is not the suppression of thought. It is the observation of thought without attachment.
You sit in your cubicle, you observe the catastrophic thought arise. I am terrified of this upcoming performance review. And instead of clicking on the mental spam and tumbling down the rabbit hole, you simply acknowledge the thought's existence and let it drift away.
You are training the brain's executive function to detach from the emotional content of the thought. With repetition, the neural pathways adapt. The awkwardness fades.
The text notes, somewhat playfully, that with enough practice you develop an inner balance that resembles the spitting image of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha.
Achieving the serenity of a Buddha in Cubicle 4B is a fantastic goal, but sustaining that level of cognitive control requires massive amounts of physical energy. And this brings us to tip 8, which deals directly with self-care and the concept of honoring your own intuition.
The text relies on a phrase that feels like a bumper sticker but carries immense weight. You gotta nourish to flourish.
It highlights a reality that ambitious professionals frequently ignore: the sheer metabolic cost of anxiety.
Operating at a high physiological arousal, state managing the Yerkes-Dodson curve, actively filtering mental spam, suppressing the urge to turtle, learning a fire hose of new protocols, burns an extraordinary amount of caloric and cognitive energy.
Your brain consumes roughly 20% of your body's energy at rest, in a state of sustained hypervigilance that demand skyrockets.
In this context, self-care is stripped of its aesthetic connotations. It is not about taking a luxurious bubble bath. It is the brutal metabolic necessity of refueling the biological machine before it seizes up.
I completely agree with the metabolic necessity of rest. But the text provides a very specific, highly tactical example of how to execute this self-care, and here's where it gets really interesting.
Wow.
It introduces a massive conflict with standard career advice. The author states that if you are invited to a happy hour with your new colleagues, but you aren't feeling it, and you know you won't be on your A game, you should honor your intuition to withdraw and simply skip the event.
This is a highly contentious piece of advice.
Wait, conventional wisdom says you must attend the happy hour to network. It violates every rule in the corporate playbook. The happy hour is where the actual social hierarchy of the tribe is mapped out. It's where the informal alliances are built. You must attend to secure your position in the tribe.
True.
Furthermore, based on everything we've discussed about embodied cognition and evolutionary panic, doesn't honoring your intuition to skip a social event run the exact risk of turtling? Aren't we just yielding to the defensive prey response and avoiding a situation that makes us anxious?
That is the absolute razor's edge of navigating a new job. Determining the difference between healthy self-preservation and fear-based avoidance requires a highly sophisticated level of self-audit. Let's break down the two scenarios.
Okay, let's hear it.
If your desire to skip the happy hour is being driven entirely by the mental spam filter malfunctioning, if you are catastrophizing that you won't know what to say, that you will spill a drink, that they will discover you are an imposter in a casual setting, then skipping the event is indeed a form of psychological turtling. You are allowing the irrational fear to dictate your behavior.
In that specific scenario, the correct tactical move is to strike the Power Ranger pose in the restroom, reappraise the anxiety as excitement, and force yourself into the bar.
Yes, you must override the avoidance protocol. However, consider the alternative scenario. You have just spent 9 hours successfully riding the 80% peak of the Yerkes-Dodson stress curve. You have actively suppressed your primitive survival instincts all day. You have absorbed a massive amount of novel information, and your prefrontal cortex is completely depleted of glucose and metabolic energy. Your cognitive battery is genuinely at 0%.
So you're just empty.
If you force yourself into an unstructured, highly nuanced social environment in that degraded state, you risk pushing your arousal level past the 100% threshold into complete cognitive failure.
You'll cross the line from stressed to paralyzed right in front of the people you're trying to impress.
Exactly. You will not be building alliances. You will be actively damaging your own professional reputation by appearing completely vacant, excessively nervous, or socially withdrawn because you lack the cognitive resources to process the environment.
The intuition the author is demanding you listen to is an honest assessment of your biological reserves. The diagnostic question you must ask yourself in the lobby before deciding to go to the bar is, am I considering skipping this because I am irrationally afraid of them, or am I skipping this because my biological system is empty?
Am I afraid or am I empty? That requires a brutal level of honesty with yourself. If you are afraid, you push through. If you are truly empty, the most professional, strategically sound decision you can make is to go home, execute the metabolic self-care, and arrive the next morning fully restored.
Because while you can skip the voluntary happy hour, you cannot skip the actual performance of your duties. The grace period of being the new person only lasts so long.
Which leads us to the culmination of the survival guide, taking all of this internal regulation and projecting it outward. We have to take control of the narrative and execute in the workplace.
This is where the psychological preparation meets operational reality. And the text offers an incredibly assertive, proactive strategy to establish your footing, beginning with tip 3.
The author advises you to initiate a meeting with your supervisor on the very first day. You do not wait for them to call you into their office to define your role. You take the initiative to clarify expectations immediately and, crucially, to clearly convey your own learning goals for the position.
And the author attaches a caveat to this advice that is staggering in its honesty. He says you should execute this transparent meeting on day 1, even if you embellished your resume.
That is a terrifying admission for most people to swallow. But the text doubles down on the vulnerability. It explicitly instructs you to ask questions, make mistakes, and play the new card as needed.
It is a counterintuitive but remarkably powerful psychological maneuver. When professionals enter a new role, especially if they feel they have stretched their qualifications to secure the position, the default instinct is to construct an impenetrable facade of competence.
We nod along in meetings, pretending we understand proprietary acronyms we've never heard before, terrified that asking a basic question will expose us as frauds.
But dedicating your cognitive resources to maintaining a facade of perfection consumes the exact energy you need to actually learn the job. By deliberately playing the new card, you engineer a psychological safety net.
It's the ultimate preemptive strike against imposter syndrome.
Think about it like sitting down at a high-stakes poker game. Imposter syndrome is the terror that the other players are going to figure out you have a terrible hand and call your bluff. But walking into your boss's office on day 1 and openly stating, here are the areas where I lack experience and here's exactly what I need to learn from this team, is the equivalent of simply laying all your cards face up on the table before the betting even starts.
You instantly neutralize the fear of being exposed because there is literally nothing left to hide. You cannot be unmasked as a fraud if you have already proactively broadcasted the limits of your knowledge.
The poker analogy perfectly captures the shift in power dynamics. You transition from a posture of defensive ego protection to a posture of aggressive learning.
You are signaling to your supervisor that you possess the self-awareness to identify your own knowledge gaps and the confidence to address them openly. You take ownership of your own learning curve, which paradoxically makes you appear significantly more competent than the employee who tries to hide their ignorance behind silence.
You seize control of the narrative. And maintaining that sense of control is the core theme of tip 6, which offers what might be the single most liberating sentence in the entire text. It addresses the crushing weight of the daily grind directly, stating, "You're never stuck."
The full context of the quote is vital. Your new gig is not indentured servitude, and you always have options, even if it doesn't feel that way.
Even if it doesn't feel that way, that acknowledgement is huge. Because let's be absolutely clear. When you have a mortgage, when you have children, depending on your health insurance, when the macroeconomic environment is unstable, a job absolutely feels like indentured servitude.
The biological necessity of that paycheck makes you feel entirely trapped within the walls of that office.
It is crucial to synthesize the psychological reality of being never stuck with the economic reality of financial dependence. The text is not suggesting that quitting a job is devoid of massive, potentially devastating consequences. The financial pressures are real.
However, the feeling of complete entrapment, The belief that you have zero agency in your own life is what breeds psychological helplessness and deep depression. The text is challenging you to recognize the fundamental truth of your agency.
You made a conscious, strategic choice to walk through those doors this morning because this specific exchange of labor for capital currently serves your overarching life goals. And theoretically, no matter how difficult the resulting path would be, you maintain the sovereign ability to choose to walk out and seek an alternative.
It completely shifts the internal monologue. You change the narrative from a victim mentality, I am a prisoner trapped in this cubicle by my mortgage, to a narrative of empowered agency. I am actively choosing to remain in this position today because the compensation fulfills my current strategic needs.
That microscopic shift in perspective reclaims your psychological power from the employer. And speaking of reclaiming power, we have to look at the final piece of advice in the article, Tip 12. It is a single, brilliant sentence that functions as the ultimate psychological palate cleanser. Don't forget to send a sorry for your loss card to your old boss.
It is a masterclass in the utilization of humor as a tool for cognitive closure.
It is pure, concentrated defiance. We have spent this entire deep dive deconstructing the agonizing mechanics of evolutionary panic, the biology of cortisol, and the misery of cognitive reframing. And the author ends the entire survival guide by reminding you that despite all the terror, you are a highly valuable asset.
Your former company suffered a deficit by losing your labor. Your new company gained a distinct advantage by acquiring it. It's a hilarious, borderline arrogant, but unbelievably effective mechanism to reinforce your own intrinsic worth. It draws a definitive line under the transition phase.
Humor of that specific nature requires a detachment from fear. It finalizes the psychological break from the past. You are no longer the terrified prey animal turtling in the lobby. You have successfully navigated the transition, mastered the arousal curve, and established your presence in the new tribe.
You have survived the mental battlefield. And what an intense architectural framework we have built today to accomplish that.
We began by staring down the ancient caveman hardware that causes the physical panic of entering a new environment. We stripped away the illusion that a bigger paycheck will magically cure a toxic workplace.
We built an IT spam filter to systematically block out the catastrophic phishing attempts from our own amygdala.
We learned to hack our vagus nerve with expansive physical postures and how to metabolize the cortisol of our evolutionary panic through heavy resistance training. We analyzed the neurological necessity of nature walks to physically power down the rumination centers of the brain.
And finally, we explored the incredible power of laying all your cards on the table on day one to completely obliterate imposter syndrome.
It is a profoundly comprehensive methodology for systematically disarming one of the most concentrated periods of stress in adult life. The through line of every single tip is the absolute rejection of passive suffering. You are the active architect of your neurological and psychological experience in the workplace.
You hold the reins. So to you, the listener, if you are sitting in your car right now in a parking garage, staring at the steering wheel, desperately trying to summon the courage to walk into that new glass-walled building, take a breath.
Ground yourself. Remember the foundational truth established at the very beginning of the text. You already know the reasons you were hired and are competent to do this job. You belong in that room.
You absolutely do. But before we conclude, I want to leave you with a final thought experiment. An idea that takes everything we've decoded today about the neurochemistry of work and pushes it slightly further down the timeline.
Lay it on us.
We have spent our entire time together mapping out strategies to artificially suppress and manage a massive, overwhelming surge of arousal. We figured out how to bring your anxiety down to that optimal 80% peak on the Yerkes-Dodson curve to survive the terrifying novelty of the new phase.
Right.
But project yourself 6 months or a year into the future. The novelty will inevitably evaporate. The software systems will become muscle memory. The social hierarchy of the tribe will be fully mapped and utterly predictable.
Okay, I see where this is going.
The question is, how do you prevent your physiological arousal from sliding completely down the far left side of the curve, dropping below that 60% threshold into the realm of absolute apathy and boredom?
If surviving a new job requires us to master the massive surge of our evolutionary anxiety, perhaps thriving in an old job, preventing the dreaded rust out, requires us to artificially reconstruct that exact same biological excitement.
We may have to deliberately introduce risk, seek out uncomfortable new challenges, and willingly invite the panic back in, simply to keep our performance edge alive. It is a vital concept to consider the next time you find yourself feeling just a little too safe and a little too comfortable at your desk.
What a brilliant provocation. We spend so much intellectual and physical energy trying to escape the fire of panic, we completely forget that we actually require a controlled burn just to stay alive and engaged. Stress just enough to impress, right? Whether it is your very first morning or your 1000th day in the same chair. So the next time you feel that familiar gnawing pit in your stomach or you see Nicolas Cage starring in another movie, don't run from the sensation. Harness the physics of it. Redirect the energy. You have the tools to crush this Tuesday morning meeting. Keep diving deep.